let's get to Drew. I'm in.
Drew McClure.
What's going on, guys?
What's up, bro? I don't want to do a long intro. You know, guys, for those of you who don't know, Drew McClure is a very successful author, and I'll jump into this in a second. Drew is also the host of the Drew McClure podcast on Apple, and I guess you can get it on Google. Go check it out. I listen to it often myself. Drew and his partner, Jordan Mitchell, have a podcast called 0 to 5,000, where they talk to major business owners who have, learned the success path of growing a business. And Drew also has the privilege of being a coach to DJ Debt Free. And I honestly can tell everybody on here that my life has dramatically changed in a very short period from working with Drew and Jordan. And I am so eternally grateful to you, Drew. I've never read this much. I've never worked this hard. I've lost weight. I've gotten on the phones and begun to dial, something I've been anxious about for a couple of years. And I give much of the credit of that to Drew and his partner, Jordan. So this month we featured Drew's book, Go For It, right? And Go For It is, I'm going to let Drew talk a little bit about it, but just to give you a quick synopsis, is the story of someone who wasn't living his purpose, or at least was doing something amazing, but felt there was more. It's in the book, Drew, so I'm sure you won't mind me talking about, went to the grocery store and had sort of a panic attack, sort of hit a point, which was like, what's going on? So Drew, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about, your experience from the book, why you wrote it, what you were hoping to accomplish, and anything else you want to share. For now, we've got a bunch of questions for you.
Yeah, sure. First off, thank you for having me on, buddy. And in short, I would say I found myself somewhat at a crossroads where, I don't know if you've had this experience before, but you kind of wake up to the autopilot version that you've been in your life, where I wasn't in a bad place, but I wasn't necessarily fully awake and showing up to my life and following the leadings that were in my heart. And that begins to take a toll on you. I describe early on in the book that there's a version of living hell that I would describe, which is being too far on this side of your potential. That anytime you have this kind of internal instinct, there's more that you could be doing, giving, becoming, and you're too far from that. You're all the way back here on this side of it. You experience this kind of internal death. And like I said, I was at the time, at that grocery store trip, I was married, still am married, to the love of my life that I met in college. And we had our first child. And she had finally gone to bed. She'd been colicky for the first 2 months, which is another form of hell, if any of you guys have ever had a kid with colic. And so my wife sent me to the grocery store to go get a Red Box and a bottle of wine to celebrate that we actually had a night together and without a screaming kid from 8 p.m. to 12 p.m. at night. And I did. And then on the way back to the parking lot, I got overwhelmed with anxiety again. This theme that had been a part of my life for so long that I had no grip on. And man, I just had it. I just started, had a full on kind of breakdown pity party in the dark Kroger in Atlanta, crying. And that was kind of when I felt like God kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, if you're ready to go, I'm ready to go. You could have a much higher quality of life, but we've got to go right now. And I said, yeah. And so the book is me kind of a few years later, in retrospect, putting everything that I learned into what I would call the 6 stages of your hero's journey, right? That there's this common pattern that we see characters in scripture, characters in movies, that we just keep the human psyche keeps paying attention to and observing. It's this character arc of transformation. And so I tried to take all the lessons that I had learned on feeling completely stuck to feeling like I was on my path again, and certainly not arriving. I talk about that at the end of the book, where there is no arriving. There's always growing. So I'll just leave it at that, and we can dive into more specific questions if you want.
Yeah, one of the things I want to specifically ask about, Drew, and again, I'm super grateful I get to spend some time with you. You know how much I adore you, and your philosophies have helped me so much. One that you shared with me that I want you to sort of talk about is this idea of experimenting, right? That sometimes we have these things that are hurdles for us, and overcoming them isn't always about like the true answer of just overcoming. It's about experimenting and finding. And so how did you find that? What did you discover to create this idea of experimenting, and what's that all about?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, I'd like to kind of turn it around for you and tell me what that meant to you when I prompted you, and that how did that change the way you were previously thinking versus were learning to think through that challenge?
um I was nervous, right? Because for me, the challenge is really dialing, right? Here at Symmetry Financial Group, I find myself in the top 10 producers of the company and feeling like I'm some sort of imposter, if you will, because I just have this like anxious, nervous feeling about dialing.
Right.
So, every time I'd go to dial, I'd feel overwhelmed. I'd feel this tightness in my stomach. And you challenged me to say, like, instead of doing the same thing every time and just running from that, experiment, right?
Yeah.
This time I'm going to experiment doing this. This time I'm going to experiment doing that. And it certainly has helped me like start dialing, and it's helped me like reduce the amount of overeating I do. So typically I eat for emotions, and now I've gotten into those emotions where I want to like eat, and I start experimenting with, let me go for a walk,
Yeah.
get some water, let me call a friend. So that's kind of how it's helped me.
That's awesome. Yeah. So if you're paying attention to that example, the way that that emerged for me is a few things that I'd like to kind of shift maybe anybody's mindset listening to this. Typically, when we're stuck somewhere and we feel a lot of shame around it and we feel a lot of pressure to perform and that kind of thing, we are looking at our attempts at pass or fail. We are either crushing this or we are utterly failing. And so we get paralyzed sometimes just by the fact that we're playing a win or lose game all the time. Binary, ones and zeros, either or. I either am or I'm not. And we start getting more intimidated around the task at hand, that I need to pick the perfect plan. And if it's going to work, it's going to work right away. And when I show up to it, it's going to be awesome. And I realized that that just wasn't helpful, that 9 times out of 10, you stay stuck instead of trying progress. And progress is a result of practice, right? Anything we get better at, we go through a series of practice where we are trying things out. We're learning a new skill. And the other thing I would say as well is, one, when we say experiment, it takes some of the pressure off of us, right? I'm just experimenting. I'm trying this instead of that. I'm trying saying yes instead of saying no. I'm going to try dialing right away instead of waiting until a better time. I'm going to try dialing with music on, and I'll turn the music off as soon as somebody picks up, because I'm going to make the time a little more fun for me. That was what one of my clients, that's what helped him get over the hump. As I said, man, how often are you on the phone with nobody on the phone with you? And he's like, a lot. I'm like, dude, blare your favorite music and just get good at spacebar and that as soon as somebody picks up. And he's like, all right. So that's one, is just experimenting in terms of to get you out of that pass or fail mindset and instead into a learner. Because when you're experimenting, you're expecting to learn, right? If, by definition, an experiment is a learning process. And so you're learning about yourself, you're learning about the thing you're doing. And that leads me to the second part, which is there's 100 ways to get to where you're trying to go, okay? And everybody is out there selling one way, their way, and telling you that's the only way to get there. And if you pay $9.99, you can get there by the end of this month, right? And that's just not been my experience. My experience has been there's probably 100 ways to get there. And what really matters is figuring out which ways, not just way, but which ways would you get there easiest. Won't be easy, but they'll be easier than doing it in a way that doesn't fit your personality, right? And so I'll give you an example of writing my book. I had just assumed what writing was like, and I had heard stories of writers and what their process was and how they approached it and the discipline they showed. And every time I tried to do it their way, I would end up just sitting there staring at a blank screen with the little cursor blinking, waiting for me to write magic. and I hated it, man. It was taking forever, and I wasn't getting any inspiration or flow state where you can't stop typing. And so I just said, hold on, I want to back up for a second. How do I like to think? How do I like to take notes when I'm doing a keynote speaking, or I'm doing whatever? I was like, I like to walk. I like to move. And so I gave myself permission to experiment for 2 weeks. Instead of sitting down at my desk to write, I would go on walks and I'd put music in my ears. And then I would start thinking through my content, and I would either type it out on the notes on my phone as I was on a walk, or I would even do voice dictation to my phone. And then the only time I was sitting down at my computer was to transfer that out of my notes, which was often copy and paste, which was nice, into the document, and then typing from there. And so that was like one of many experiments I did that helped me really complete the process of writing and actually have a lot of fun in the process, was saying I need to actually remove all the ideas I have of what this should look like, and instead say, what are the basics I need to accomplish? And is there a way to get there that might be more, might fit more with kind of my personality? Does that make sense?
Yep, totally. Absolutely. And so, I know Ryan has some questions, but I want to ask one more for right now. For a long time, right, Ryan Federico has done coaching, right? Whether it's with Giant, whether it's, specifically with Jordan. And I know you and Jordan worked on a book called Personal Gravity, and
Yeah.
not exactly sure it's out. And Jordan mentioned, like Ryan and I are a great partnership, and you guys have taken the time to sort of learn something about us, to, grow your business. And I was really, really afraid of going into coaching with you and Jordan because I was terrified that you were going to hold me accountable to the things we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
One example, which I'm pretty open and vulnerable, which was a huge success but didn't feel like it at the time, was I met this woman and I liked her. And I wanted to ask her out on a date. And you and I coached for like an hour about asking this woman out on a date. And I was terrified, just absolutely. And you put it to me in a way that like helped me understand that getting her to say yes or no was not the point, but overcoming the fear and actually taking action. So, for anybody thinking about coaching, right? Because now, like, I wouldn't do without it. If I have to like sell stuff that I own just to pay for coaching, I would do it because it's meant everything to my growth. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like coaching agents at Symmetry specifically, and why coaching would be important to them?
Sure. Man, so for us, what we see coaching is really sitting at the intersection of three things. That is your professional life, your personal life, and what I would call your psychological life. That those three things overlap. If you think about a Venn diagram where three circles overlap, and the shared area is what we focus on, which is where is life, my personal life, my professional life, and my internal life, my mental life, all converging. And anywhere those three are overlapping, which is why in a coaching session with Keith, we had talked about what he mentioned. It's not typically what I'm coaching people on. I'm not a dating coach. I'm not, necessarily even a life coach, but I do understand that they all play together, right? That we like to try to neatly divide them in our lives. But you've ever seen somebody show up from work and have a bad day because of what happened at home, right? Or someone shows up at home and has a bad experience at home because of what happened at work. They all kind of flow together. And so coaching for us is really getting in there, and it's about you. It's not about what we want. It's not about our goals, our wishes, our timelines. It's about your goals, your wishes, and your timelines. And man, people can do amazing things when they have a friend, and when they have a kind of a wall that their back is against, right? And sometimes just the fact that we had the conversation and we're going to follow up on it acts like a wall that your back is up against, right? Because man, we talked about this last time, and next time we're gonna follow up with what happened with what we said. We always go through the ABCs of coaching. Account for last time is A. B is where you bring your biggest challenge, and C is where we ask a critical question that's kind of on our mind about you or your business to end with. And so there is accountability. but the accountability has nothing to do with guilt or shame. The accountability has nothing to do with us pressuring anybody, but it's unearthing what you really want for your business or for your life and having somebody willing to help you get there. And it's as simple as that. So we have a blast. We coach probably, I don't know, 25, 30 symmetry agents between Jordan and I. And then we coach CEOs and executive teams across industries outside of that, and have a blast doing it, man.
Amazing. Just to round out that story, Drew shared with me how he asked out his wife. So I used that exact same formula. And even though she didn't say yes, she's still a friend to this day.
Exactly.
Right? I felt so accomplished that I was able to get over that hump and just do it.
Exactly.
Super grateful. I know Ryan has a question.
Well, so it's a two-part question that I'd love to hear your kind of take on. So I didn't think that everybody knew that you coached as many symmetry agents as you do. So now that you've kind of uncovered that, I'm really interested in part A of the question. Where do you most commonly see the struggle for symmetry agents, and what's the biggest hurdle? We don't want to go through all the hurdles, but what's the biggest hurdle? And then comparatively speaking, the second part of that question is, how does that compare to your other clients, right? To the other corporate clients? Is it all the same hurdle, and we maybe just feel unique because of what we're siloed in?
Yeah, no, it is unique unless I'm working with a sales agency, which I have and do. But your challenges are very similar anytime that we're working with a sales team. And the reason why is you're in sales, first off. And secondly, you have to go hunt and kill in order to eat, right? So the way I like to maybe put an analogy behind it is often the work environment that people are in, the responsibilities are much like a gatherer instead of a hunter, right? So there's hunter and gatherers. The gatherers, and this isn't good or bad, it's just a different way of living. A gatherer has the thing that they know how to cultivate. They go look for these things that are waiting for them, and they just have to be responsible to go and collect them and be efficient about it and make sure that they do the daily assigned tasks, right? But then there's people like you who have become hunters, and hunters have to go actually catch a prey. And they're out there on their own. They have to learn how to stalk, how to actually like bring it home. And sometimes they go hungry for a while, right? Sometimes there's weeks of no food, but they know, man, if I just get one, this could feed me the whole winter, right? And so they're a different breed. But what's different about that, especially, we can even leave the analogy for now, but for you guys, what has always been the most consistent hurdle is showing up consistently. Like without a shadow of a doubt. The most from top to bottom, like no matter who I'm coaching, whether I'm coaching a Brian Delaney or Brad Smith or whoever, or I'm coaching a first-time agent, the biggest hurdle in all of the agencies I come across is people having what they say they want to do and what they actually do, and being on fire one day and then being frantic and frozen the next day. And if we can help people, which we often do, overcome just simply the lack of consistency of showing up and doing what you know to do, success quickly follows. It really is.
So what's been the most successful kind of experiments around that? Because I agree. Like, I think a lot of times we put, especially for new agents, and if you're new on this call, this may be a couple steps ahead, right? But hopefully you're taking it in and you're taking some good notes here, because this stuff is gold. We always focus on the phones. We say like, oh, the phones are the hardest part. Everybody's got the hardest part with the phones. The phones are not the hardest part of this. The hardest part of this is your schedule. Right? Like, the first thing that we have to do is create a schedule. Because I promise you, if you had a locked in schedule that had 6 hours of dial time, and you showed up for that 6 hours of dial time, even if you just sat at the desk for the first 6 hours and didn't call, eventually you're going to start calling. Right. If you stick to a schedule and can be consistent with it, it's going to happen. So what are some of the things that you've seen work really well in kind of overcoming? Don't give all the trade secrets away, because
I'll give whatever away. Absolutely.
I know. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, so some of it is individualized, right? But I would say this. So one, schedule is huge. Often at the beginning, we will help agents think through their week and actually make a schedule that they can commit to. And that's a big one. Anytime, I always talk about important things need a home, right? So if you, your kids, your dog, right? Like we understand innately, like if something is important, it deserves a home. And I would say it's the same thing on your calendar. If something is important to you, it deserves to have a dedicated home in your week where you've said nothing else lives here, only this, my dials, right? It's a protected part of your calendar that is specific to that, so that anytime you're feeling stressed, you know I'm at least, I know when I'm doing this. It's not up in the air. It's not how I feel today. It's not as long as I don't get interrupted tomorrow. I mean, this is how it was for my book. I had to give it a home from 8 to 9 a.m. every morning because it was the only hour I could predictably protect on my calendar to at least make sure I got an hour of writing in a day. And so that would be the first one. The second one would be understanding what really is the issue. So often, you maybe you've said this out loud, but people will say to me, I just don't know why I'm not doing it, right? They're like, I know I should, and I've said I would, and even the bills are piling up. Like, I don't know why. And it reminds me of in scripture where Paul talks about, I keep doing the things that I said I wouldn't do, and I keep not doing the things I said I would do, right? And there's this confusion. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. Like, I said I wouldn't do this, but I did it. Or I said I would do this, but I didn't. And it leads you to say, like, why? What is wrong with me? Like, what is going on? And so one of the things I did, actually, are you able to allow me to share my screen? Can you give me that access? I'm going to share an image with you guys to talk through for a second that I think will help you a lot.
Keith, you're the main host, so you have to make him co-host.
I think he did it. Okay. So let's do this. Can you guys see this? Yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So this was about a year ago when I got sick and tired of hearing the same question over and over again. Even outside of Symmetry, when I was doing keynotes, people were asking me, like, what is the key to showing up and achieving your dreams? You know, you've been working with business leaders, athletes, all those kinds of things. What goes on in their performance, right? So at the end of the day, I'm a performance coach. And I said, man, if anyone has an issue in their performance, they want better, I always go back to the drawing board. And when I go back to the drawing board, I always see these 4 categories involved in whatever they're trying to accomplish. And what I seek to do is align them and solve for each of these variables. So in each of these categories, if something's off or out of alignment, it affects the rest of what you're trying to do. So skill plus strategy plus stress plus story equals your output in any given subject, but especially in your professional life, right? Now here's what's interesting. Most agents, most people I talk to, whenever they have an issue and they go, I don't know what's going on, guess what they focus on? They naturally will focus on skill and strategy. Like 99% of the time. Maybe I need a new strategy. Maybe I need to try my own thing. I know Symmetry wants me to do it this way, but I bet there's another strategy out there that would work better for me. Or maybe I need to go to another conference and I just need a new skill set. And even as consultants get brought in like us, companies are often wanting us to teach the newest and greatest strategies out there for leadership or whatever, and the newest and greatest skills. Those are certainly a part of it, and they do matter. But they are like the iceberg that's in the bottom right-hand corner of that image, where it is the thing that is most visible and is on the surface, so we always pay attention to it, but it's the smallest percentage of the whole issue. What's really going on most of the time is actually down below the surface and is internal. And that's how we respond under stress, which is habitual. We have learned patterns of how we respond to moderate or extreme stress. And stress, by the way, is just the perceived weight that you are carrying. So it's the psychological feeling you have when you feel under pressure, when like you're carrying a lot of weight. And then the second, or the deepest, is story. And what I mean by story is Everyone has a story that they tell themselves about themselves on a daily basis. Whether you know it or not, there is a dialogue going on inside of your head that is very, very subjective, but it feels incredibly objective, like it is forces of nature, like it is gravity, that you can't just say, I believe in gravity or I don't believe in gravity. You throw a rock up in the air and it comes back down and you realize gravity exists, right? This is how it works for us. We feel like we know who we are. I know what I can do and what I can't do. I know what I'm capable of, what I'm not capable of. I know what my patterns are, and my past is going to predict my future. I'm just going to do what I always do. And then we end up falling into that story again and again. So what I would say is, besides schedule, where I end up spending the initial time with people is actually kind of sniffing out like a bird dog, the bullshit stories that people tell themselves about themselves. And I use that word on purpose because they're bullshit and they stink and they are like sabotaging and ruining our lives. And we try to overlook them. Why? Because they feel scary, because you think they're right. Again, they feel objective. And so we try to move past that subject and just work on our habits or just work on our strategies and just work on our skill sets, not realizing that all the effort we do above, so any effort you do above the story can get sabotaged by the story, right? So this is why you could make $1 million tomorrow and lose it by Wednesday, right? Because the story that you live in isn't in alignment with the goal that you're trying to achieve. And so the moment you get it, you don't know how to keep it. And so you lose it. This is really important. If we upgrade our dreams and we upgrade our goals without upgrading our estimation of ourselves, we will lose every time. It is the strongest force in the universe. The strongest force in the universe. Why? Because it's the most close to you. Everything else, if you're thinking about a concentric circle, everything else on this list is getting farther and farther away from your locus of control. How you view yourself, how you view your situation, how you view others, the story you think you're in, that's the deepest thing that you hold tightly, and it dictates all of your actions. And so if we have an action problem, we need to back it up and say, okay, then we likely have a belief issue, right? And so often, man, we all make assumptions. Everybody else has a happy-go-lucky story about themselves. They're incredibly confident and optimistic, and no, they aren't. Most people are drowning in insecurities. Most people have some area of their life that they just think they can't get it together. Most people think if you've ever heard the term imposter syndrome. Has anybody ever heard the term the imposter syndrome? It's a term used in psychology. And what you find is that most people who are in a place of leadership or spotlight or success experience what they would call an imposter syndrome, meaning everybody thinks I'm something that I know I'm not. And they end up creating walls between them and people to try to keep other people from realizing they're not as together as everyone thinks they are, that they got lucky. They're not sure why they landed in this job. They're not sure how they got the results they got. And they want to keep everybody, and I call it the Wizard of Oz. Everyone feels like the Wizard of Oz. Like somehow I've concocted this story and this reality that everyone's buying, but at any moment, a tiny little dog could pull back my curtain and reveal to the world that I'm just an old man pulling levers, right? And what I help people realize is they don't need the Wizard of Oz. The whole point of that story was that he actually could have helped them on his own, just as a normal human being. She didn't need ruby red slippers. She didn't have to have magical characters and promises. He had a weather balloon sitting in the back that he knew how to operate, that could take her home. All he needed to be was himself, right? And so it's when we actually can have a story that's congruent with who we really are or actually capable and in alignment with what we're trying to go and achieve, well, then it removes all the internal resistance that keeps us from just diving in and experimenting, right? Because it's not like when you dial the phone, someone pulls a fingernail off. That would be one thing. If every dial you made, you lost a fingernail, you'd be like, God, I don't want to do this again, right? That's not what happens. So why do we treat it like torture? Well, because it's rubbing up. Our dream is in conflict with our estimation of ourselves. And that it becomes a rub. It becomes a war on the inside. And that's why I talk about and go for it in stages 5 and 6. But stage 5 is the war, where you're on the edge of the promised land, where you've wandered, you've asked questions, you've left old jobs, you've maybe even traveled a great distance, you even got some things going, but you're standing on the edge of the promised land, and what's in front of you is a war. But that war is in your head. That war is not external. That war is internal. And if you pay attention to that promised land story I give out of the Old Testament, they talk about there's giants occupying the land, right? And when the spies go out and see there's giants occupying the land, they say they are like giants and we are like grasshoppers in our own eyes, right? What is that? That's overestimating the resistance, and that's underestimating yourself. And that's what we all do. This is going to be terrible. I am going to suck at this. And it's like, well, of course you're not showing up consistently. You think this is going to be insanely hard, and you think you are not able to do hard things. But we have a motto in my life. We have a motto in my family that I use in coaching often, which is this. I know 2 things about you. 1 is that what's in front of you is hard. And 2, you can do hard things. Both of those are true. What's in front of you is hard. I'm not going to act like it's easy all the time. It's hard, for sure. But guess what? You can do hard things. And so most of us in our life keep trying to find something great that doesn't require something hard. And those things don't exist. Everything you could want in this life is on the other side of hard. Everything you'd want is on the other side of hard.
I just I wanted to jump in here a second, Drew, because this is I personally think that adding anything to this would be subtracting from it, because I think this is a great drop the mic moment. I was just going to answer a couple of these questions. Gabe and Ashley had a question that was strategy based, and I was going to say, I'm glad you said it. Chapter 5 and 6, and go for it, because the questions are, how do I remove the story from my mind? How do I deal with stress, overcome stress, avoid the feelings that stress gives you? That's chapter 5 and 6, and go for it. It's an amazing couple of chapters that sum up the direct answer to those, and would love to both you guys involved in reading that book. We're reading it as an agency right now, and we're going to be going over I think the last week of that next week, which we can summarize chapter 5 and 6. But there was a question about acting as if. It was about is it helpful or hurtful to act as if?
Yeah, as long as you know what you're doing. And what I mean by that is it's a tool that I would for sure embrace, as long as you don't buy its own lie. And what I mean by that is, like, I'm not asking you to pretend to be something you're not. But I am asking you to take actions as if you were starting to believe who you really are, right? So there's one thing to walk around like you have $1 million and you don't. That's not helping anybody. There's one thing to exaggerate your accomplishments or your abilities in the sake of confidence. That's not helping anybody. But when you take actions that are intentional, that treat yourself like you're more capable than you've previously realized, that is awesome. That is acting as if. That is acting as if there is a story that you were prepared for, that all you're experiencing are the emotions of fear that are keeping you from that. I love that. But I just need you to hear me. Like, I'm not talking about pretending to be something you're not. I'm challenging you at your core that who you actually are is better than you've ever given yourself credit for. And anywhere you're not great yet is somewhere you could be great with enough time and effort and discipline. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I'll give you one if we have time. I don't really know how long you guys go. But I
just wanted to, be respectful of your time. That's all.
Oh, I'm good, man. You already got me talking on a Sunday night. We might as well go for broke, man. We might as well make the best of it. So let's go for it. So I'm going to share another one with you guys that I think will help you when you say, how do I replace the bullshit story? Let me go back here. Well, How do I move this? Hold on. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to move this screen so that I can actually see my own screen.
While you're doing that, Drew, I want to mention that if you come to this home office, which is in my home, or if you come to the office where I do work in Somerset, there's a little card right next to my desk, and it says, what I'm about to do is hard, and I can do hard things.
100%.
Yeah.
So somewhere along the way, we adopted a story, and it comes from one of four places: our peers, our parents, our past, or our pain. Okay? Whatever lies have Trojan horsed their way into your regular thought life have come from one of those four things, because they were the things that shaped us. Not all bad, right? I'm not a big fan of just blaming all of our problems on our past or our parents or whatever. But I need you to know that we started off somewhat like a blank slate, and we just learned from the things around us. And so along the way, we learned what we thought were our abilities or disabilities, our capabilities or lack of capabilities, based off of those four P's: our parents, our peers, our past, and our pain, right? And out of that, we attach meaning to it. And then we kept feeding that meaning, looking for it everywhere we went, to where we just assumed, yeah, I can't do hard things. So the rest of my life, I'm going to look for easy things. I'm going to try to hack everything, find a way around it. I have 3 young kids, and they all fell in love with this story called Going on a Bear Hunt. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it's got this refrain. So you get up, every time they end up getting up to like a river or something as they're going on a bear hunt. And the refrain is, you can't go over it, you can't go around it, you can't go under it, you got to go through it. And as I was saying this every night, night after night, and it started to stick with me throughout my day as I was thinking about stuff that I was trying to avoid, or as I was working with clients who had something hard in front of them, but were trying to avoid it. And I would find myself smiling, going, hey, man, can't go around it, can't go over it, can't go under it. You just got to go through it, right? And the good news is you can. You actually can. But someone, somehow, something made you start doubting your ability to do hard things. And there is nothing more fulfilling than when you do something hard. There's nothing more fulfilling, the self-respect and the self-confidence that comes out of that. You start looking at that going, well, shit. If I can do that, what else can I do that I thought I couldn't? Right? What else could I do that I thought I couldn't? And it starts to open up territories of your life that you had marked off because you started to think those territories were guarded by hard things. And now you're like, well, maybe that doesn't mean I shouldn't go there. Maybe that means that's where I must go. I talk about that in my book, that for me, my compass was off. What I thought was north were all the areas of my life that seemed like would be easy, but those kept leading me to misery. And I started realizing it was actually the things that made me most afraid were not just the things I should do, but they were the things I must do. Why? Because something was there for me. Like, if I almost thought about resistance and fear as being something trying to keep me from what was rightfully mine. And I was like, man, this is like a scarecrow. It's like somebody out there wanted to protect this field that I own. And so they put a scarecrow up to try to scare me off from going into that field. But it's just a freaking scarecrow. And so I started recalibrating my compass to the things that for no good reason. Now, guys, there's plenty of things for good reason that scare the crap out of me. I will not be going and wrestling grizzly bears. There's no good there's a good reason to be afraid of that. There's no upside. I watched the movie The Grizzly Man, and he got eaten in the end. I don't want to go do that. That guy made a mistake. But I'm talking about the things in my life that there's a goal, there's a desire in my heart, and there's a way to get there. And I'm scared shitless. That's not a good reason to not go for that thing. That actually makes me lean in harder and go, okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe life is calling out to me and saying, this is your challenge. This is your crucible, where you say, man, before this, I was one person. After this, I was another person, right? We all need those moments. So here's, after 5 years of working with people and getting rid of their bullshit stories, and my own, by the way, here's what I've paid attention to. I learned this from my friend, Dr. Jerome Liba, who's a neuroscientist. This is a cobbled together from several people that I studied in psychology and neuroscience and all the rest that I want to source and credit for this. But this is what I see happening 99% of the time. The only reason I don't say 100% of the time is I'm not smart enough to know if there's not an exception to the rule. But 99% of the time, here's how things work. we have a belief. We have a thought. Thought is just a superficial belief. It means you're not quite sure yet how deeply you hold it to be true. The deepest or most extreme would be a belief. Like you don't even question it. It just is how you think about it. Whenever we have a belief, here's what we absolutely know from studying neuroimaging. Every time you have any thought, it will release an emotion. Now, how does it do that? How do we know that that happens? Well, because emotions, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but emotions are just chemical cocktails that your brain releases. That's all it is. We feel physiologically a certain way that we call an emotional state as a result of the chemicals that have just gotten released into our system, right? So if my wife just is home right now, I don't know if you guys can hear her making a shake. Hopefully you cannot. It's loud in my ear, hopefully not in yours. But if I were to hear her stop making the shake and scream, "Oh my God," like at the top of her lungs, I'd probably have a belief she's in danger, right? And that belief she's in danger would pump an immediate, and this is important, it's immediate and it's logical in terms of the belief. An immediate and a logical chemical cocktail that would be in alignment with that belief, which would be one of cortisol and adrenaline. So it'd be the stress result and it'd be the adrenaline result. Why? Because my brain is trying to put me in an emotional state to take an action that would get me the result that I need to get, right? And so the belief is the trigger. The belief triggers an emotion. The emotion prepares us for an action. So I would, all of a sudden, I would forget about you guys if I heard that scream. You no longer exist. My heart rate would go from whatever my resting rate is now to a whole hell of a lot higher. And I would be full of drugs and cocktails to do one of two things: kill somebody with my bare hands, or grab everything I love and care and put it on my back and run fast away, right? It's preparing me to do something, to get the result that I believe I have to get, which is protecting my wife and 3 kids. So this is how we operate in everything. I just gave you an extreme example, but we operate this way every day. Why am I anxious? I don't know. What were you just thinking about? Right? We just pay attention to the emotion and we just pay attention to the results. And we go to work on the emotion and we go to work on the result, not realizing they are the result of the thing before them. And this is a cycle. So if you believe you're going to fail, it'll probably put you in an emotional state of fear, of anxiety, of hopelessness, of despair, right? And those emotions will make an action likely that's in alignment. This is what's important. It's in alignment with the belief and the emotion. So it might be not trying very hard. Do you realize they did a 3-decade study on procrastination? And that the most common factor they found in procrastination was fear. It wasn't a characteristic. It wasn't a personality trait. It wasn't a ADHD versus a normal brain. Procrastination, at the end of it, I mean, they did group studies, they did focus groups, they did one-to-one counseling, and they found every time it had to do with fear. Different kinds of fear, but it had to do with fear. Often the most common was fear of failure. Now, why would you procrastinate if you're afraid of failing? And here's what they found. Was the reason why you procrastinate if you're afraid of failing is so that when you do fail, like you know you will, you have the excuse of, at least I didn't try that hard, right? Which is mind-blowing. That's how weird we are. That it's like, okay, I'm afraid of failing, and instead of working hard to not fail, we actually say, I know I'm going to fail. And so what I need to do is I'd be crushed if I tried my hardest and still failed. So I'll procrastinate and do my best, air quotes, at the last second. And when it doesn't work out, I'll know that, like, I have a reason why it didn't work out. Because in our mind, we think the worst thing possible would be to put our whole heart into it. Work in a logical timeline. Show up, prepare, and still fail the test. That would crush us. No, it won't. It won't crush you. It wouldn't at all, right? So here's what I mean. We have a belief we're going to fail. We have an emotion that primes us to do something. That action might be avoidance. That action might be just getting in the way, like you're coming into a sales meeting, and instead of just being present and listening and being okay if that person doesn't need what you're offering, you start white knuckling it. And you start really driving intensely, and you start trying to force a sale down someone's throat, and all of a sudden it makes your results suffer, right? and you don't get the result you're looking for. They either kick you out of the house or they buy a policy that 2 days later they actually cancel because they felt pressured into it, right? And you're like, I knew it. That's what happens from result to belief. After you get the result, it reinforces the belief. And you go, look, I've got even more evidence of what I initially thought. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the more you do it, the faster this cycle happens, this feedback loop, and it starts going from conscious brain to subconscious brain. Meaning, by the time you get to a coach, you say, I don't know why I'm doing this. Because none of this is happening in your conscious brain. It's all happening under the surface because it's been going unchecked for so long. So you ask me, how do I get rid of it? Here's what I want to teach you. This is what I teach all of my high-paying clients. If you can observe this, you'll notice a pattern. You'll have your own pattern. So just start somewhere. Start with dials. Start with somewhere that you're not showing up consistently and you're experiencing either lack of action or negative emotions. And then I just want you to start to explore, almost like filling in the blanks. What's the emotion I experience? What's the action I do or don't take? Like typically, what's my response? Like how do I behave when I feel this way? And what's the result I'm getting or lack thereof? And finally, what's the belief that I think is driving that emotion, right? And as you start to see the interplay, it starts to become really kind of clear. You stop feeling crazy, guys. That's the first good news. You stop feeling weird. You stop feeling crazy because you're like, well, of course, if I'm thinking that, I feel this. If I feel this, I do that. If I do that, I get this. They're all connected. Okay, so that's the first. It's just to start to know the pattern that gets you into trouble. Now, if you have a hard time, as some people do, understanding what their beliefs are, start with the emotion and work backwards. Here's what I mean. If I were to tell you tomorrow to go and pay attention to what you think on a day-to-day, on a moment-to-moment basis, it would paralyze you because you have like a million thoughts a day. But if I were to say, pay attention to any overwhelmingly strong emotions you have that feel afflictive. That could be anger, that could be analysis paralysis, that could be depression, that could be anxiety. Just pay attention when those spike. That's all. You'll recognize those, right? And when you recognize the emotion is there, then I want you to back up 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, and ask myself, what was I just thinking about that might have triggered that emotion in me, might have released that cocktail? And that's a way easier way to kind of unearth what the BS stories are in our life, is not to hunt for them directly, but when I experience that really strong emotion, to quickly back up and go, oh, I was just fantasizing about failure. Like I was just imagining my schedule and I was thinking about how hard that was going to be and that it was going to suck. Oh, okay, that's what sent me into this shock of anxiety, right? So that's one way to discover belief. Now, the tool I want to give you and how to use this is just simply understanding this. There's 2 things on this cycle that you can control and 2 that you cannot control. Let's start off with this. You're going to be tempted to fixate and try to control the emotions and the results. Well, of course, they're the most heightened. They're the things that we feel the most is our emotional life, the state we're in, and the results like our bank account or our quote unquote success, right? And we're like, I would like to change both of those. I'd like to feel awesome and do awesome. Got it. I'm right there with you. I want you to feel awesome and do awesome too. But it's not going to happen the way you think. You can't go directly at those 2. And here's why. Because they are the effect, not the cause. Right? The belief caused the emotion. The action caused the result. So if you want to change the emotion or the result, you have to change the thing that caused it to be in the first place. It's counterintuitive, but once you see the whole cycle, hopefully you can buy in that this makes sense to you and you'll stop wasting. So take it this way. Like I said, if you have a belief, your body releases a chemical cocktail into your system. This is very similar to if you had chosen to take 5 shots of alcohol. If you take 5 shots, unless you're like, man, you got an incredible tolerance. But if you take 5 shots of alcohol, you'll likely be experiencing being tipsy or drunk. That is what we would call a state. You're in a drunken state, right? That would be an emotional state. Can you at that moment go, gee, I just don't want to be drunk anymore? No. Why? It's too late. You already drank the alcohol. I have to wait for it to be processed out of my system before I self-regulate and come back to a non-drunken state. It's the same thing with emotions, but here's the good news. The good news is instead of lasting several hours like alcohol does for your kidneys and liver to process it and for you to start feeling normal, your body processes the chemicals that we call your emotions in about 2 minutes. So that's called a shelf life, meaning how long will they stay in your system if you don't put more into your system? So think about this. Someone walks into the, like, let's say someone was hiding under my desk right now and I didn't realize it. I've got 3 kids. It's totally possible. They've done this to me before. If one of them were to pop out right now and scream, I'd like freak out because immediately would have hijacked my belief that I'm in danger and it would have pumped my system full of adrenaline. Now, as soon as I look down and see that that's my kid and I'm not in danger, I now am not continuing to feed the adrenaline signal to my body. So it stops producing adrenaline. But do I still feel it? Yeah. Have you ever felt that way? Has everyone scared the crap out of you? It takes about 1 minute to 2 minutes for your breathing and heart rate to come back down, right? Why? It's just like alcohol being processed in your system. Your body is slowly processing it out so that you are no longer under the effect of that belief, right? So that's the good news, is you can't change your emotions directly. But if you work with the 2 things I'm going to give you, which are the actions and the beliefs, you will end up regulating your emotions to your satisfaction. That's the best part about this. So here's how it might work for you moving forward. You likely won't be aware of this until you feel the emotion. And let's just, for context sake, say that emotion is dialing tomorrow. I don't know if tomorrow's a dialing day for you or not, but let's say tomorrow is dialing day. And you wake up and it's now on your calendar and it's time to dial, and oh my God, I don't feel like it. I just feel like I want to wait till lunch. And then at lunch, I want to wait till after lunch. When my food settles down, I wake up for my nap, right? Like whatever it is, like you're in that emotional state of, I don't want to do this right now. Well, you've already had the belief and you're already in the emotion. So what do I do now? Well, I can do 2 things. One, I can use this as a learning moment and back up 5 seconds and ask myself what the belief was that just triggered the emotion. So that's just learning, by the way. That's just something you write down before you lose track of what you were and how you're feeling. After that, remember where you are on this cycle. You went from belief to emotion. What's the next thing that you are offered on this cycle? Action. And this is critical. This is critical. You need to know what the action is that you would take if you weren't feeling that way before you feel that way. What's the action you would take if you did not have whatever BS story is leading you to feel that way? So I want you to imagine it differently. There's a woman who's been doing amazing work with people on this kind of thing. And one of her questions she asked people in private work and in conferences is this: who would you be without that thought? Write that question down. It changed my life. It'll probably change your life. Who would you be without that thought? Like, just imagine for a second, for whatever reason, it was never in your brain. You never considered it. No one ever sewed it into your thinking. Who would you be if you literally didn't have that thought? You probably would be more creative. You probably would have tried things by now. You probably would show up and dial the phone if you didn't have the thought that I'm going to fail. You would just go do it because that made sense to you, right? So I ask myself, what action would I take if I didn't have that thought and that emotion? So that the next time I'm in that afflictive emotion, I now know I'm about to step into the one of 2 categories that I have control over. I don't have control over emotions and results. I do have control over beliefs and beliefs and actions. You guys tracking with me? I do have control. I do have control over beliefs and actions. So what that means is that I can do something even when I don't feel like doing that thing. It is the superpower that life has given you, is the ability to do something that you don't feel like doing, but you know is what you should do. All we have to do is to develop a tolerance for doing things that make us uncomfortable, and our life changes. So we go, everything in me right now is screaming to put this off, but I've already reflected on this, and I'm trying to overcome this cycle, and so I'm at the action point, which means I can change this cycle by changing my actions right now. I had a guy struggling with the phones out of the hunt agency, and they're all killers and crushers. And he called me. We've been doing work together. And he texted me, actually. He said, I'm about to have a panic attack. I was supposed to do my dial starting an hour ago, and I still haven't made one dial. What do I do? You know what I did talk to him about? I didn't call him and talk to him about the story in his head. I didn't call and encourage him. I sent him a text back that says, you have 5 seconds to make a dial from the time you read this, and I want you to text me the moment that phone call is done. He texted me, one dial down. Now what? I said, you have 5 seconds to do 5 push-ups and then make your next dial and text me when you're done. He texted me back, I'm done. I started to text, you have 5, and he texted me back, I'm good now, thank you. And that was it. That was it. Here's what I didn't let him do. Think about it. We already passed that stop on the train tracks. You've already thought about something, and now you're feeling a certain way. The only thing we can do now is choose as fast as possible a different action that you know is a good action. Because once you do, you get a result that's better than the one you were going to get if you'd avoided it. And then once we get the result, after he made 2 dials, he was back at the belief stage. And once he made 2 dials, he was going, you know what? Those 2 dials didn't kill me. I bet I could do another one. And that put him in a better emotional state. That gave him another action. And he was on his way. 3 hours later, he had done 150 dials. Holy crap, we hijacked his cycle. Now, over a few weeks of doing that, he's never struggled with dials again. Right? So my whole point is, each of these feedback loops are like hopping on a train that takes you to a destination, the same destination every time. Every time you have that bullshit thought, that bullshit story, it takes you to a destination you are all too familiar with. You're like, yeah, that leads me to poor, or that leads me to pissed at myself, or that leads me to procrastination. But here's the great part about train tracks. Every now and then, there's a lever on the side of the train track that can switch it. And it can take you from going to that destination to onto a new track going to a different one. And the only 2 pull levers on this entire train ride is action and belief. Anytime you're at those 2 places, they act as a lever that you can pull, and it immediately puts your train on a different path going to a different destination. So I'll take any questions, or I've totally gone over time and we need to end.
You definitely have, and we definitely do, but it's all good because that was awesome. And the only point that I would make to everybody on this call is Symmetry's got 4 cornerstones, and the first one is belief, and the second one is massive action, right? For a reason, specifically for this, right? Those are the ones that we can control. So, man, it was so awesome, Drew. This is live on Facebook right now. I know where everybody's going to go back and watch it again. I think Keith will put it up on Vimeo, but thanks so much for dedicating so much time.
Man, it was a blast. Thank you guys so much. You know why I love working with Symmetry agents is because you wouldn't be here if you weren't trying to go for something. And that is why I love working with you, because you wouldn't have taken this if some part of you didn't think there was some part of you that could do something great and could do hard things. And all you have to do is just convince yourself. And once you do that, you're on your way. So guys, thank you for having me so much. Keith, Ryan, you guys are doing amazing stuff, and honored to be a part of your lives.
We normally close out with music, but we're a little bit over tonight. Drew, how do people get in touch with you if they want to coach with you?
The only reason I'm hesitating is I don't think we have any open coaching space right now. But I do have, we are starting.
Scale, Drew, scale. Come on, man.
So we are starting to bring in other coaches that I am vetting out right now and starting to pass people off to. So that's why I was hesitating, because I do think we should still talk if you're interested. So they can go to McClure.com. There's a place on there to get in touch with us.
We can make it easy for you. Get in touch with Keith and Ryan, and Keith and Ryan will put you in touch with Drew. And
I would just give you my email. I'd be happy to give anyone my email on this call, but since it's on Facebook Live, I do not want to give it there. So how about this? If you want it, reach out to one of these 2. They'll give you my email, and I'll make sure, whether it's with us or somebody we trust, if that's what you need, we'll get you hooked up. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Drew. Love you, brother.
Yeah, love you. Much love, guys.
Have a great night, everyone.